Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast.
You are now tuned in to this episode of our podcast. Today we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And we're back. Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamm was the president of the Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshiva University for many years, passed away approximately about 5 years ago. But he was larger than life, and a lot of his writings are now coming back to life, thanks to our guest, Rabbi Tzvi Sinensky, who's an editor, publisher, editor, and he's actually come out and put out a new sefer, a new book called Al HaRishonim, Al HaKaronim. It's on Hebrew, based on a lot of the lectures and Torah thoughts of Rabbi Norman Lamm of blessed memory. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Zev. Pleasure to be on with you.
Thank you. Maybe you can share with our audience before we start to his writings who Rabbi Norman Lamm was in the Orthodox, but really in the Jewish world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that framing question, Zev. It's again a real privilege to describe a little bit about Rabbi Lamm in a larger sense, but especially this particular sefer. Rabbi Lamm was born in 1927 in New York, and he actually didn't grow up in the Yeshiva University world, even though that's where he spent much of his life. He grew up went to Yeshiva Torah Vidas there. He had a particularly close relationship with his grandfather, who was a real inspiration for him in learning and in the sefer in particular, Rabbi Yehoshua Baumel, who was the author of a multi-volume halachic work called the Emek Halacha. He learned with him for an entire year between high school and when he went to Yeshiva University. He enters YU as an undergraduate in I believe it's 1945, graduates as the valedictorian in 1948. He actually was originally thinking about a career in chemistry. The then president of YU, with whom he became extremely close and ultimately became his successor as president, was Dr. Belkin. Dr. Belkin ultimately convinces Rabbi Lamm to become a Rav. He goes into the pulpit, he earns his smicha, and he spends about 25 years in the pulpit. In 1976, he's elected third president of Yeshiva University ultimately, and he's there for the rest of his career. President for 27 years, chancellor for an additional 10, Rosh HaYeshiva for all 37. He retires in 2013, and he passed away, as you say, approximately 5 years ago in 2020.
Now, you mentioned that he went to Torah Vidas, which is considered more of a Haredi, ultra-Orthodox yeshiva. However, when he went there, it was a different yeshiva. It was probably a little closer to the YU model in those days than it is today.
Yeah, I think so.
Historical record. I just was curious to
I'm not the expert. I'm not an expert in the history of Torah Vidas, but my impressions of is similar to yours. I would not say that his rebbeim necessarily encouraged him to go to YU. I don't think that would be the fair way to say it. And he was very honest about the fact that his grandfather, Alav HaShalom, was a massive influence, and he described him as a more Hamisher Rav. Rabbi Lamm was famed for championing Torah Umada, right, Torah and general studies. So someone said, "No, was your grandfather who was a massive influence on you? Was he an advocate of Torah Umada?" They said, No. He was a Hamisher Rav. That wasn't his thing. A massive Talmid Chacham. He had tremendous support. He was incredibly supportive, but that wasn't his direction either. But I wouldn't say they didn't write him out either for his decisions at the same time.
Well, he was a major impact in modern Orthodox, even though we did have a dispute with Rabbi Elliot Tzvi from the more yeshivish world.
Yeah, absolutely.
The caveman controversy.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, he did not look for controversies, but they seemed to find him over the course of his career. He certainly, God willing, you'll see there's a lot of historical materials that's going to be Mirz Hashem forthcoming. So you have certainly the controversy with Rav Tzvi. I believe that is most intense around 1986 to 1988. That whole controversy. But even before that, he wasn't afraid to stand up and to advocate for what he believed in. But sometimes that embroiled him in some complex politics. But the key thing about Rabbi Lamm is that he always was staunch in his principles, but also incredibly respectful and dignified in the way that he would respond even to sometimes what one might describe as very painful attacks.
attacks on him for being. Listen, there has been tensions between the Haredi world and the modern Orthodox world. I think it's abated quite a bit in the last maybe 5 years, 10 years. But there was a period of time when you mentioned where I think was more intense.
Oh, no question about it. I mean, during the time that he was president at YU and beforehand as well, there was certainly, and there were some shifts even then, but during the bulk of his time in the leadership of YU, there was a tremendous amount of tension, and really even the Rav himself. It's not a secret that the Jewish Observer, which was the organ of the Aguda, that when the Rav passed away, that it was they marked it with Rav Soloveitchik Zal, Zechorno Livracha, and anyone and everyone got a Zecher Tzadik Livracha. You didn't have to be Rav Hutner or or Aaron Cutler to get that. So there were a lot of tensions. There were a lot of very strong disagreements.
But there was also an incident with, I believe, with Rav Herschel Schechter at the Siyam Hashas, where he was not acknowledged, even though he's a Talmud Chacham, and that engendered controversy at that time too.
Yeah, that's right. It continued, certainly. It continues to a lesser degree, but I think there's definitely been a softening. And the truth is that the paradox of it all is that Rabbi Lamm had a not insignificant role to play in the larger sense, in terms of that greater cohesion between these different parts of the Frum community. It's, if you recall, when he came to YU, really the kollalim and the level of learning was not it's not a knock on Dr. Belkin, chas v'chalila. It was just the community was in a different place. He once wrote a letter shortly after he became president, and he asked someone, he's like, I can't find the proper set of shas in the Beis Medrash. There's svarim that are missing. Not chas v'shalom that there wasn't a shas. Of course there's a shas. But now, thank God, if there was a shas, it wasn't a full set, or someone had walked out with a sefer, there would be dozens of extra small shasim at people's mekomos and throughout the Beis Medrash and beyond. So it was a different time, and together with many others in the community, Rabbi Lamm was at the forefront of increasing the level of Talmud Torah at YU, and that's been one factor among many that has contributed to a greater cohesion, again, as I say.
What part of everything is modern Orthodoxy, and YU has moved to the right. It's not the same. In fact, my son got smicha from YU. At the YU Chag HaSmicha, the ceremony for new rabbis, you had some Chabadniks that were also graduated from there.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say that the Chabad graduates, which absolutely are present, and I think are very much, from what I can see, they're made to be feel comfortable and really generally, from what I can tell, enjoy their time at the yeshiva. But I wouldn't say that's necessarily the marker. Chabad is its own.
I wouldn't call a marker, but I'm just saying there are others also. But that's a more clearly visible example of it. But you have others, and listen, a lot of YU rabbis serve in shtibels and other institutions that are more to the right than to modern Orthodox.
Yeah, no question that the YU Beis Medrash in particular has produced, I would say, a wider, more diverse range of rabbanim who identify throughout different parts of the Frum community, and that certainly contributed as well, no question.
Now, of course, how did you get to putting out Rabbi Lamm's writing? Or you're also fixing up the website to make it more accessible. How did you come to Ala Rishon Ala Achronim?
That's a great question. So as some listeners may know, it's through no merit of my own that I'm here. I am married to Rabbi Lamm's eldest granddaughter from Englewood, New Jersey. Their eldest, his and Rebbetzin Lamm's and Rebbetzin Mindy Lamm's eldest is my mother-in-law, Chaya Lamm Warburg of Englewood, New Jersey, and they have five wonderful young women in the family. Tova, my wife, is the oldest, and so I was the first who merited to marry into the family. So through no merit of my own. Once we were married, or even as we were dating, and Rabbi Lamm, I of course had to go through not one fire but two, because my future father-in-law, but my future grandfather-in-law as well. He signed off. He also signed off on my smicha. So again, I don't know if I did anything right, or just he liked me because his granddaughter liked me. But I passed the test and hopefully eased the way for some others as well. During those years when we were first married, I think it was 2000. 2004 to 2007, I want to say. We were married in 2004. My wife and I had the opportunity to learn with Rabbi Lamm in his office. He was already the chancellor of Yeshiva University, as I mentioned. So he was involved in fundraising, but his schedule and other aspects of the leadership of the yeshiva, but his schedule was much less intensive. So we had the zechus of learning together for those 3 years. And we actually worked together on this particular sefer. It wasn't just that it was handed to me, or even that he had asked me to work on it, which he did, but we actually had the opportunity, Zev, to collaborate, to brainstorm together. I was able to share some ideas for the publication with him, and anything that he signed off on has been incorporated into the final version.
And of course, he was also the rabbi at the Jewish Center in the west side of Manhattan. And a lot of the English books are based on his sermons and lectures at the Jewish Center. Now, your sefer, your book, is it also with some of the lectures from the Jewish Center, or is it completely different? 'Cause I know it's a little bit more halakhic and a little bit more Lumdish.
Yes.
How do you translate Lumdish in English? I'm trying to think. Okay.
More Talmudic analysis, you could say.
Analysis. Okay. Lumdish. It's missing something in translation.
Oh, yeah, no, this is, I mean, you could certainly translate a work like this, but the gap between the English and the Hebrew would be, I think it's fair to say, much larger than if you took his sermons. So yes, and as you say, there's a treasure trove of his sermons, over 800 of them, which are currently available online. It's just a Google and you can find everything. And we actually have an email subscription list, and we send out one a week on Thursdays. Zev, I don't know if you're on the list. If you're not,
put me on the list. I
gotta get you on.
I love his on Chumash. I use it all the time.
There you go.
The lectures were given a while ago, but you know what? They're still relevant for today.
Yeah, we call it timeless Torah because it really is. I get these comments all the time. And unfortunately, during the present war, it's under very difficult circumstances, obviously. But since the war, we've been sharing many of his drashos from the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War, during the war, and then the immediate aftermath. And I mean, just swap in a couple of details, and I get regular text messages and emails. Says, Rabbi Sinensky, I thought it was delivered yesterday. It's amazing. Someone recently actually pointed this out to me. You know, one of the two founding Rashi Yeshiva of Yeshivat Har Tzion. So there was Rav Aharon Lichtenstein Zatzal, who was one of my primary rebbeim, along with Rabbi Lamm, and some others as well. It's the other founding Rosh Yeshiva was Rav Amital. And Rav Yehuda Amital, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, had a close relationship with Rabbi Lamm. And he actually, I found that someone sent this to me. It was actually published in one of Rav Amital's Svarim that was recently published posthumously. So Rav Amital actually says, and it's in writing in the Sefer, that he says, you know, they sent to me one of the Talmidim, a mutual Talmid of both Rabbi Lamm and myself here at Har Tzion, sent me a drasha of Rabbi Lamm because he thought I would appreciate it. I thought it was delivered yesterday. Turns out he delivered it and wrote it 40 years ago. You know, so it's amazing, as you say. So yes, so the Jewish Center drashos from 1958 to 1976 when he was there, and also, by the way, in that collection you have as early as when he was the rabbinic assistant, I think he was a rabbinic intern technically to Rabbi Luxstein the Elder, Alav Shalom, Rabbi Joseph Luxstein.
And that would have been a KJ
at KJ from 1951 to 1952. He was the rabbi of Kihilat Kadima in Springfield, Massachusetts, 1954, 1958. So that's 25 years of drashos. Those are the ones we send out. These, however, were all delivered while he was president in Rosh Yeshiva. In his capacity as the Rosh Yeshiva of YU, every year there was a Yortzeit shir that he delivered in the Beis Medrash in memory of Dr. Belkin, Alav Shalom, as well as sometimes either the same shir was dedicated or as a separate shir delivered in memory of Rav Yitzchak Elchanan Spector. Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, the famed posek, also the namesake of Rietz, Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary. That's where the letters come from. So every single year he would deliver this drasha. It was a classic Lumdish drasha shir that he would give in English, but it was appropriate to write these up in Hebrew. So many of these were actually
so they were given in English and you translated into Hebrew.
No, so he actually wrote them in Hebrew. I didn't do any translation for this particular.
He delivered it in English to the.
Yes, he delivered them in English. I mean, maybe the earliest ones are. I don't think they were in Yiddish. I think it started in 1976. It was too late late for Yiddish. I know this. The Talmidim spoke in English. He delivered them in English, but they were lamdish pieces. So what he would do is he would actually just write every single one of them up. He was religious about his publishing, and even if he wouldn't publish something, he would always have copious notes. I mean, when he was niftar, just to give you a sense, not just the sermons that he delivered, at the drushos at the Jewish Center and beyond, not just these shiurim, but his letters and ksavim and notes to himself, and a 500-page black book of quotations of every single topic, from Emunah to Tchias HaMesim, literally all of this.
From faith to the resurrection of the dead. I'm just translating because I always get complaints. Sometimes when you talk about Judaic topics, you don't translate enough. Not everybody understands it, so I am a little sensitive to that. So I'm sorry.
Thank you for cutting in. I'll try to be more sensitive to that throughout the rest of our conversation as well.
Let me just tell our audience. We're speaking to Rabbi Tzvi Sinensky. He is an editor, he's a publisher, he's a writer, he's working on different books, and the website of Rabbi Norman Lamm, of blessed memory, who is the Rosh Yeshiva and President of Yeshiva University. His new book is called Al Rishonim Al Achronim. It's put together by Kodesh Press. It's in Hebrew, but it's something which also has a lot of the vitality and brings a lot of Rabbi Norman Lamm back to life. Having said that, any plans of putting it in English too? Because he's spoken in, maybe the tapes exist of lectures, but wouldn't this also be good as an English version?
Yeah, we'll see what happens. He actually published, there was a predecessor to this work, also published in Hebrew, and that's called Halachos V'Halichos. He actually, when he wrote he wrote in his will, or an addendum to his will, he asked for me to work on the publication. In fact, my mother-in-law actually called me up about, I don't know, maybe 6 to 9 months after Rabbi Lamm passed away, and she says, "Tzvi?" I said, "Yes." She says, "We have this letter from my father, alav shalom, of blessed memory, and he asked if you could put together this second volume of his halachic writings, of these Talmudic analyses. Wondering if you could do that." Of course, what was I going to say? Of course, I said with pleasure. So there's another volume as well. You can see it right over here. This one's called Halachot V'Halichos. Not sure if those who are watching at home can see it, but you can get a sense. It's a similar kind of style, Kodesh Press, led by the Rabbi Alec and Caroline Goldstein, did a fabulous job on this sefer. So they're kind of different colors, but mirror images of one another. In the first volume, he has an introductory section, which is not just more technical, but actually much more accessible. And he talks about his approach to studying Talmud. He talks about the influence of Rabbi Soloveitchik, his great teacher at Yeshiva University. He talks about the influence of Rabbi Baumel, whom I mentioned earlier, his grandfather, with whom he learned for an entire year. And that essay, which I think is a little bit more accessible to the broader public, I have my eye on getting around to having that one translated and perhaps posted online, made available to the public, perhaps made into a kind of a small book or pamphlet for publication as well.
Give us an example of a shiur, a lecture that you write about in the book that we can talk about in the public. I know not everything is suitable because it's very lumpish, which means it's very complicated Talmudically.
Sure.
But give us an idea of a taste of some of the things that you write about that has an impact on us.
For sure. Absolutely, Zev. My pleasure. Just to be full transparency, I want to be clear. This is all written by Rabbi Lamm. I'm just the editor. I compiled everything. These were all published, actually, as I say, in Hebrew during his lifetime. So I just don't want to. I appreciate you giving me the credit. It's very generous of you, but I also
but you're putting it together and you're choosing which ones you're putting in the book. And I don't know if is there any editing to the writing, or just exactly the way he wrote it?
I really tried to keep myself to be as hands-off as possible. If he were alive, for me to work with him on everything, then I might have taken a different approach. But you work with someone who was such a towering scholar and was so precise in his use of language as well. And so I wasn't gonna. I just didn't feel that it was appropriate. That my task was to edit as freely here. So I just really kept myself to eliminating any typos, to the typesetting, to selecting which pieces in which order, making sure the titles were coherent. I took a couple of pieces, I split them up for the sake of the book, and so it would kind of flow nicely. I wrote an introduction, all these kinds of things. Yeah, so I'll give you an example of those. One piece he talks about seems like a very technical one, but one of the things that he tries to do in these sermons or these shiurim that he delivered at Yeshiva University is he would start with something abstract, start with something analytical, start with something that was a little bit more of what we call lumdos, this theoretical study, and then he would transition from what we call halacha, in the study of the law, to haggadah, to deeper ideas, to more accessible ideas. And one of the things that he would do, and this is built to some extent on the model of his own teacher, of Soloveitchik, whom I just mentioned, he would do this in many of the yartzites, shiurim. Just like Rav Soloveitchik, when he, on the third day of Shvat, every single year while he was well, he would deliver, after the passing of his father, he would deliver his own yartzeit shir. Not to compare, Rabbi Lamm would be very upset with me if I compared between the levels or anything about his shir to that of his Rebbe. But nonetheless, he also gave this shir on an annual basis, and he modeled it after these two parts. So I'll give you one example. So in this case, one of his lectures is dedicated to the subject of what happens when we know that for a man and wife to be divorced, the law is that you have to give what's called a get, right? So you have to give a divorce document, and without that, the marriage continues to extend, and they're not permitted to be remarried without the transmission of that document is properly executed. And the Talmud has this unusual law where it says, normally you would expect the woman has to actually receive the get. That's what we do generally now, just to receive it in her hands. But let's say she's at home, and she has her courtyard, what we call a chatzer in Jewish law, and the husband just throws it in. So unexpectedly, the Mishnah and the Talmud rule that she's divorced, even though she didn't hold it in her hands, and everyone wants to know why. And so the Talmud actually doesn't really explain why that is, and there's a whole notion that develops in this based on one of the classical medieval commentators called the Tues Red. And he explains, we have a concept, what we call kinyan arba amos. If I grab an item, if I just find it on the street, even if I don't actually seize it physically, but if I'm within 4 cubits, approximately 6 feet, and I grab hold of it, so the law is I acquire it. So Rabbi Lamm takes this, and this, what seems like an abstruse detail in the laws of divorce, and it's the laws of Masechet Gitin, that was the tractate about the laws of divorce that the yeshiva was learning that year. And in his hands, it becomes a tool to talk about the idea not just of the technicalities of divorce, but our relationship with physical objects and what that tells us about our relationship with God. And he talks about this idea that God has actually different kinds of presence in this world, just like we do. He says we have 2 modes of acquisition. There's what we call Rishuta Kinyanit, or 2 types of property. There's what allows us to technically acquire something, but there's also Rishuta Tivit, that which is in my natural or organic context, right? So if I'm near someone or something, that's considered to be connected to me in some deeper way. And he says what's true of human beings is true of our relationship with God as well. He says God has 2 modes of relationship with the world. There's the Rishuta Kinyanit, which means God technically owns this world. He created the world. He owns everything in it. So everything that's around me belongs to the Almighty. But then, says Rabbi Lamm, there's another kind of acquisition that God has in his world, and that's called a Rishuta Tiv'it, and that's kind of a more natural mode of interaction. Now, here's his move. Check this out. So he says like this. I mentioned earlier the theme of Torah Umada. The Rabbi Lamm said that there's Torah, but there's also intrinsic value to general learning, to interacting with God through, I said he was going to be a chemist, and he would always talk about this idea. The purpose of studying something in university, etc., is not just to get a job. That's very important, but it's not alone enough. It's also to develop a connection with God and all of his manifold ways of realizing himself and manifesting his presence in this world. So this is something amazing. He says like this. He says, study of general studies says if I study chemistry, if I walk into the lab, if I go outside and I see a rainbow and I'm just blown away by it, study a mathematical equation, great literature, philosophy, whatever it might be, it says that has potential religious value, assuming it's appropriate, but it has potential religious value. It says, but not the same as Torah. Why? It says general studies, that's Rishuta Tivit. It's just connecting through God through Teva, what we call nature. But Rishuta Kinyanit, if someone acquires something, he says that's a 2-way relationship. Because God acquires us, and that means we have a relationship. It's like during a wedding. When there's a Rishuta Kinyanit, there's actually a relationship between us and God. He says, that's what happens when I study Torah. It's not just God revealing himself to me like through a rainbow or through a scientific equation or whatever it might be, through Beethoven, etc. He says it's actually allowing me to come closer to God. So even though he believed in Mada, he believed in general studies, he understood that Torah is greater and it's qualitatively different. And this frames an entire kind of theological approach to the relationship between God and humanity. And all of this from some technical law or detail on the laws of divorce when it comes to a shiur that he gave in the Beit Midrash in the study hall on Tractate Gittin. Remarkable.
It's remarkable because Torah Umada seems to equate Torah with modernity on the same level. That's what the word actually means, Torah Umada. But your son, Rabbi Lamm, of course, had Torah on a higher level than, let's say, secular learning. That's one of the distinctions of modern Orthodoxy and I guess traditional Haredi Judaism is the value of secular education, the role of women in Jewish life, and also the role of Israel in Jewish life. Those, I think, the three defining issues of modern Orthodoxy versus more traditional Haredi Judaism.
Yes, this is such an important issue that you're raising, and it goes back to some of these controversies that you mentioned earlier between the Haredi camp and modern Orthodoxy and Rabbi Lamm in particular, because sometimes in these controversies, some of his words were either misunderstood or sometimes even misconstrued. He would always say, look, the leading lights of the Haredi camp generally were too sophisticated, on the whole, to misunderstand. But sometimes there were lower level people who like to stir the pot, and they this is what they do all day long. They're the kanaim, they're the zealots who unfortunately maybe have too much time on their hands and don't always work very hard to fact check to make sure that they're really understanding their ideological opponents accurately. So he was often accused of exactly what you say, of saying that Torah and Umada are equal, and that what he's really saying is that instead of studying Torah, you may as well, studying from Talmud, a page of Gemara is just the same as going to your class in the afternoon and studying Shakespeare. Nonsense. Just because I think that there's inherent spiritual value in studying great literature, great ideas, and so on, studying sciences, mathematics, etc., doesn't mean that it's equal to Torah. That's very clear.
But they say, listen, Torah and something else, it's just Torah. You can't do Torah and something else. That's what I've heard. But their critique of modern Orthodoxy, Torah Umada, it's Torah.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Zev, because he wrote this entire book, Torah Umada, as I'm sure you and many of your listeners know. And in that book, he could not be more clear on exactly this point. He insists very clearly that he has his own position, but even goes further. He talks about what he calls a pluralistic Jewish community. Now, he does not mean in this context pluralism as in, any approach to Torah or to Judaism is equal. He maintains that, for example, the conservative perspective or reform, reconstruction, etc., are incorrect. We should nonetheless have respect for them and be able to engage with our colleagues around areas of agreement that are not theological necessarily, or not halachic necessarily, but just areas of mutual concern. We should collaborate and have good relationships and all of those kinds of things, and treat one another with immense respect. But he didn't believe pluralism in that way. But he did maintain that Torah only is a legitimate perspective. It's like the Gemara talks about, let's say, Abaye and Rava, two of the greatest Amoraim rabbis of the Talmud, and they disagree about something. So the Talmud says that in such debates, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim, they're both the words of the living God. And he says about Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, the Talmud says, right? They have an argument, and Beit Hillel thought Beit Shammai was wrong, and yet they insisted on quoting the position of Beit Shammai, with whom they vociferously disagreed, before even that of their own. And
there was intermarriage between both of them too.
That's right. And the Gemara says that they married among one another, which, nowadays, people with different political persuasions, they don't even want to, they consider that intermarriage. Democrats and Republicans, God forbid, it's like, 50% of Democrats and Republicans now say that they wouldn't even consider going out with or marrying someone of, the other political persuasion. But Rabbi Lamm actually held, despite all the attacks and all the internecine strife, and frankly, all the libels. I mean, there was a lot of libeling. And again, I say sometimes from lower level people, but
did he ever take it head on? Did he ever write about it? Did he ever speak about it with force and really stand up to those critiques and attacks on him?
Yeah, he really, really did. I mean, it's so interesting. He was not of the persuasion that I shouldn't defend myself.
He's not turning the other cheek.
He did not turn the other cheek in the following. He did not agree with the church on that at all. Not on, by the way, not on matters of of life and death either. Of course, it was anything but a pacifist, and spoke and would have, I'm sure, been speaking very, very strongly about the importance of Israel's self-defense at this moment in fighting against anti-Semitism and not being naive to the dangers of anti-Semitism, all these kinds of things. But also in these matters as well. I'll give you an example again, but I'll give you an example in a moment, but I just want to emphasize, he always made sure that even those with whom he disagreed and against whom he defended himself, he would often say, their perspective is legitimate. In other words, I hold Torah Umada, and they hold Torah only. It's a machlokas l'shem shamayim. This is a debate for the sake of heaven. So that's an important thing.
By the way, he could have answered when he was critiqued for Torah Umada. He said, listen, I went to Torah Vadas.
Right, it's built into the very name of the yeshiva, right?
He started off there, so it's Torah and knowledge. So he's Torah and Mada,
good.
right? He could have answered that.
He would have appreciated that because he was very, very good with words. He had all these word plays, and so I think there's something about that remark that he would really.
He would do anything for a worthy cause.
Very good. Oh, Zev, you're an honorary rabbi already. So we're gonna give you an extra smicha soon.
No, I have smicha, not from YU. But anyway,
I apologize. I didn't know that.
Not a problem. But
my kids say that I have. Not only do I have smicha, I have dad smicha. My jokes are so bad, so I've learned not to bother. But Zev, I will tell you this. In night, you asked, did he ever respond? So I was just emphasizing he did respond, but not not in that kind of, not by denigrating and not by dismissing that there could be a disagreement. But he did defend himself in 1986. So YU spent a good year, if not longer, celebrating the centennial, the 100th year anniversary of kind of the earlier Yeshiva Seitz Chaim, which is essentially a precursor to the yeshiva and became kind of the historical foundation, institutional foundation for Yeshiva University. So it's during that centennial year, there was a Chag HaSmicha. It was one of the quadrennial celebrations. Every 4 years, there's a celebration of the new musmachim, of the new rabbis who have been ordained over the last number of years, and they remain in the yeshiva, or some of them are, or might be in pulpits or educational positions or what have you around the globe, and almost all of them come back, and there's a great celebration. 1986, they scheduled the Chag HaSmicha, that celebration, in conjunction with the centennial. So it was a massive celebration. It was, all the Rosh Yeshiva, they came in from Israel and not just from America, and many, many others as well, and a very large crowd. It was 1986. I said earlier that many of the debates about cavemen, etc., were happening right around that time. If you look, and we still have it on videos, if I encourage anyone, and the listeners who want to go see this, you can see the power of Rabbi Lamm at the heights of his oratorical power. If you just Google Rabbi Lamm Centennial 1986, you'll find this video on. We actually have it on our YouTube channel. Rabbi Lamm, we created one. And he defends himself and the yeshiva by extension from some of these attacks. And he talks about the degradation and the difficulty and the pain that many Rebbeim, not only himself, had suffered at the hands of those who wanted to slur and to libel the yeshiva University in particular. But he insisted, it was a beautiful, beautiful talk. He insisted that even though we're not yielding our approach, we're not going left, we're not going right, we're going what he called the derech hayashar, what we believe is the straight, true path, our understanding of avodas Hashem, but never, never while stooping to painful remarks in response. Always taking the high road, he said.
In other words, when they go low, you don't go lower, is what you're saying. Yeah,
that's it. I mean, I don't have to tell you, even sometimes among very well-meaning people, conversations happen in the gutter. Sometimes I like to tell myself this only happens on social media, but it turns out it's human nature after all.
It was even pre-social media. A few moments left. How would Rabbi, in his capacity as president, and particularly Rosh Yeshiva, how would he deal with the gay situation, with the gay clubs on YU campus, where they had to put the club back in, then they took it away? How would he deal with that whole controversy?
Yeah, hard to speak about this because not only is he obviously not alive today for this instantiation, but many of the things that happened at that time were really were kind of behind the scenes. I can't speak to what he would say or do.
Did he ever write about it or speak about it?
Yeah, he definitely, there were, what I can say is that there were a number of public releases that are available that anyone can find nowadays. One of the distinctions that he drew was between what happens on the undergraduate campus and what happens on the graduate campus. Obviously, campuses, obviously there's not, there's one Torah and there's one halakha and there's one approach that's consistent throughout.
How did he deal, for example, with gay Jews on campus? Did he have a position on that official club, which they've had, and take it away, about ordaining gay rabbis? These are issues that have come up. How did he or would he have dealt with that? I'm just curious to know.
Yeah, so you can see for yourself. I don't want to speak for him. You can see that that he definitely took I would say a more lowercase c conservative stance to some of these questions that came up, kind of in the center of the yeshiva on the undergraduate level, and he distinguished between that and the graduate level. That is certainly a distinction that he drew.
So what kind of distinction? How would undergraduate be different than graduate? What does that mean? What's the nafkamina? What the difference in halachic Torah, Talmudic Torah?
Yeah, I would say that there were well-known cases at Einstein, at Cardozo, at the medical school, which was then attached to Yeshiva University to its law school, and with regard to gay housing. And so in those cases, in many of those instances, he did not believe that on other campuses it was the same, strictures would apply.
So again, in other words, more lenient, he allowed it to take place in Cardozo or Einstein.
He allowed for more latitude, these sorts of things there. That's not necessarily the same as a club. And I don't want to overstate. Again, the best record, though, for all this is to look at the materials that were actually just...
So where can people go to find this, either about the book, Al Rishonim, Al Achronim, or find more material? Where can they go find it?
So, I mean, if you want some of these more juicy materials, so that's those things are many of them are available online. You can probably just Google around and find some of those things. In terms of this material, so this sefer is available online. You just go to you can just Google Al Rishonim Achronim. You go to Kodesh Press's website. I believe it's Kodesh Press, KODESH PRESS.org, I believe. But everyone can find it there. It should be available under new releases. You can find it there on the website. If you're interested in the sermons, Zev, I'll have to send you the link. But for anyone else,
I definitely love to see it every week. Like I said, I have the 5 books on Chumash, which are great, but I'm sure there'll have more material than that as well.
So anyone, again, you can just Google, you can go to yu.edu/Lamm, LAMM, and you can see there's a sign-up sheet right there when you come onto the website, and that's where all the sermons live. God willing, maybe we'll do this again one time, because God willing, in a few months, we're going to be having a new website, which will be much more expansive, include many, if not scurrilous documents, I think fascinating and historically very significant materials, including thousands of correspondences that have never before seen the light of day. So lots more exciting stuff to come, but I can't reveal all my secrets on just this one, so that we can make sure that we have another chance, God willing, to talk.
You're going to go on a limb regarding future stuff? Not yet. Anyway, Tzvi, Sinensky, editor, writer, educator, latest book is called Rishonim Achronim. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of our show.
Thank you so much for your time, Zev. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to
Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.